What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Fast and Furious season here on Cinematic Reviews. I'm your host, Chris, and this, of course, is the show about all things movie and TV. Every week, I break down and review the newest releases, build up franchises like Fast and Furious, and even upcoming projects. You can support the show by hitting that follow button on your favorite podcast network, as well as following it on all social media platforms. All of those handles can be found on either the Cinematic Reviews Facebook page or the show's website at podpage.com/cinematic reviews. It helps out a lot, and I appreciate all the love and support out there from everyone. It doesn't matter if you win by an inch or a mile, winning is winning. The Fast and the Furious is racing your way.
Let's go for a little ride.
This is yours, but if you win, you get her too.
What the hell is that all about?
A business deal that went sour. Plus, I made the mistake of sleeping with his sister.
The Fast and the Furious was released on June 22nd, 2001. The film stars Vin Diesel as Dominic Toretto, Paul Walker as Brian O'Connor, Jordana Brewster as Mia Toretto, and Michelle Rodriguez as Letty. The film was directed by Rob Cohen, who is best known for this, Stealth, Dragonheart, and Triple X, which also stars Vin Diesel. Cohen actually plays the pizza man that is blocked by the first race in the film. The film grossed over $207 million against an estimated $38 million budget. Neither Michelle Rodriguez or Jordana Brewster had driver's license or learner's permits before the production of the film. The fight outside the grocery store between Paul Walker and Matt Schutz, who plays Vince in the film, was all improvised. Mark Wahlberg, Christian Bale, and Eminem were considered for the role of Brian O'Connor before Paul Walker was cast. Sarah Michelle Gellar, Jessica Biel, Kirsten Dunst, and Natalie Portman were all considered for the role of Mia before Jordana Brewster was cast. Working titles for the film include Redline, Racer X, and Race Wars. Paul Walker was the first to sign on to the film. Vin Diesel then eventually agreed to star in the film after some script changes were made for him. Timothy Olyphant turned down the role of Dominic Toretto, thinking that the film would be too similar to the other film, Gone in 60 Seconds, which stars Nicolas Cage and Angelina Jolie. Timothy Olyphant would have been interesting as Toretto, but this is definitely a Vin Diesel type of role. The film first received an R rating by the MPAA due to the graphic nature of some of the shots of Vince's mutilated arm during the final robbery sequence in the film. After those shots were cut out of the film, it was given a PG-13 rating. At the time, Vin Diesel and Michelle Rodriguez were dating off-screen as well as on-screen. And then lastly, during my research for today's episode, many sites, including a Fast and Furious wiki, states that the events in this film actually take place in 2004, not 2001. I did the best I could to kind of dive deeper into this, but I did not get this confirmed. So as of right now, I am going to treat it as it happened in 2001. I'll have to do some more digging throughout this season, and I will find out for sure if there is any kind of weight behind this theory that it is in 2004 instead of 2001. So Fast and Furious is one of my favorite franchises of all time. My dad actually had the Fast and the Furious, Too Fast, Too Furious, and Tokyo Drift, all on DVD back in the day. And as soon as I discovered them, I was immediately on board with this franchise. I mean, Fast 5 is one of the greatest action movies of all time. Furious 7 was a very, very emotional theater experience with the passing of Paul Walker. Fast and Furious 6 is one of my favorites of the franchise. Unfortunately, the franchise is in a bad place right now. Fast X was released a couple months ago, and I did an episode on that, and it's not good. Honestly, every installment since Furious 7 has been worse than the previous one. There's a lot to unpack when we get to those, but on today's episode, we go back to where it all began with The Fast and the Furious, which centers around Paul Walker's Brian Spillner, aka Brian O'Connor, and Vin Diesel's Dominic Toretto. Paul Walker is an undercover cop who is tasked with infiltrating the Toretto gang on suspicion of stealing DVD players, which is very, very early 2000s. DVDs, as you probably have realized, aren't really a big thing anymore, with streaming now taking over that part of the business. This film is also a huge ripoff of the awesome film Point Break, which stars Keanu Reeves and the late Patrick Swayze. Keanu was the Paul Walker type of part in that film, and then Swayze was the quote-unquote Vin Diesel of that film. It's a great film. I really, really love it. If you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. It is on the schedule for Cinematic Reviews, so I'm really, really excited to break that down eventually. Now I want to start with Paul Walker. Paul Walker, as you probably know, passed away back in 2013 during the filming of Furious 7. I believe this November is actually going to be the 10th anniversary of his death, so that's part of the reason why I wanted to do this Fast and Furious season this year, to kind of celebrate and break down one of his most iconic movie roles in his career. I've always been a huge Paul Walker fan. I think he was a great actor who was very underrated. He really knew only one note, because that's where his strength was. And he really, really leaned into that. I really respect it when an actor knows what kind of actor they are. Walker was one of those actors for sure. He was in a ton of stuff before his death. Some great, not so great. Takers, Vehicle 19, Bobby Z, Joyride, to name a few. He's definitely my favorite in the Fast and Furious franchise. I truly believe that this franchise unfortunately died when he died. I mean, look at the films that we have had since his passing. We've had The Fate of the Furious, F9, Fast X, Hobbs and Shaw. I mean, they speak for themselves. These are the bottom of the barrel, essentially, and they all came after the passing of Paul Walker. Now, Vin Diesel, I'm a little more lukewarm on. I'm honestly not a huge fan of Vin. I think his performance in this first film is probably his best of the franchise, probably the best in his career. Triple X didn't work. Bloodshot was a very, very bad film. Riddick is probably his second best character / performance in his career. As the Fast and the Furious franchise goes on and gets more ridiculous, so does he along with it. I mean, he starts becoming more and more involved with the script and the production of all these installments. He's basically the top credited executive producer of the franchise right now. And I think that is a big reason why the franchise has been declining as far as quality. Justin Lin leaving the franchise also didn't help. He came back for F9, but not even he could save that film. There's a lot of issues with that. I do love what the Dom character stands for, though. He's all about family. Family is essentially the heart of this franchise, and it all starts with this first film. I mean, we get the first family meal at the Toretto house, which becomes a very, very big element of this franchise. Most of the installments see some type of meal scene in here where we kind of just take a breather, we look around, and we kind of just enjoy the family and the people around us. Watching Brian and Dom race each other was freaking awesome, and I really, really missed that. We get some racing scenes in future installments, but it's a major element in this first film. Once we get to like 6th, 7th, and 8th, and so on, racing is pretty much gone. And rewatching this first film for today's episode really, really reminded me how much I miss it. I mean, after this first film, the racing element takes a huge back seat, and it is replaced by these wild, ridiculous stunts like battling a tank in Fast 6, or driving cars out of planes in Furious 7, or battling a submarine in The Fate of the Furious, ridiculous stuff like that. It's nice to kind of come back and revisit kind of where the franchise was built from, and it's this racing element through the streets of LA, which is really, really awesome. The rest of the cast is pretty great as well. Most of them become permanent members of the Toretto gang in future installments, but a couple only appear in this film. Letty, played by the awesome Michelle Rodriguez, becomes a major, major character of the franchise as it goes on. I honestly think she is probably the best actor out of everyone in here. Letty is one of my favorites of the franchise, next to Brian for sure. Jordana Brewster's Mia also becomes a major character in the franchise. It's great to watch her relationship with Brian grow with each installment, and this is kind of where they first meet, and we get to see them kind of start out on like their first date, and then eventually they get married and all that. So it's really cool to revisit that as well. Vince only returns for Fast 5. I'm not a huge fan of the Vince character either, so I'm not mad that he's only in 2 installments. Now, Leon and Jesse are the 2 members of the gang that only appear in this first film. Jesse, for obvious reasons, he is unfortunately killed towards the end of the film by Johnny Tran, who is the antagonist of this film. I remember watching it for the first time as a kid and being just shocked that they killed Jesse off. And it was a pretty violent way too. Johnny Tran just mows him down with an Uzi towards the end of the film. It was a crazy sequence. And Leon, on the other hand, just disappears after this film for some reason. We never see him again. The top theory is that he saw this life of crime very, very dangerous and risky. So he decided to part ways with the Toretto gang. I mean, he sees Letty and Vince almost die during that final heist. And it's pretty understandable if he didn't really want to keep going on with Dom and the rest of the family. Johnny Strong, who plays Leon in the film, has stated that he would love to return as Leon, but only in the right circumstances, and I agree. It has to make sense for him to come back. I actually have a great take on this. I'm probably going to get annihilated by the rest of the fan base for saying this, but I have given a lot of thought these past couple of years, especially with how the franchise is going right now. I think they should have brought Leon back in F9 instead of Han. Now, I know Han is a huge fan favorite. I love the character too, but he was killed off in Tokyo Drift. Resurrecting him for F9 was just really, really lazy, and I think really distasteful for the character. Plus, it was spoiled in all the trailers leading up to the film, so that made it even worse sitting in the theater. But I really do think that it would have been a lot better to bring back Leon for F9 instead. It would have made more sense also. But that's just my take. I really, really want Leon back in this franchise. I think that would be something to really kind of elevate this back half of the franchise for sure. If we get somebody to just come back from the first film that everyone talks about. I mean, every installment, everyone brings up the idea of, oh, is Leon going to come back in this installment? Is this going to be the film where he becomes Leon once again? I just would really, really love him to return. And I'll talk a little bit more about all this, bringing back characters during the F9 episode, because I do have some more thoughts on the resurrection of Han. But I just wanted to throw out that my personal take on the whole Leon disappearing, and let you guys kind of sit on it throughout this season as we go on each week. I'm really excited to break down the Fast and the Furious today, so let's take a quick break before diving into standout scenes. On the next new release reactions episode, it's Insidious: The Red Door. Join me as I react to the final chapter of the main Insidious storyline. It's been 10 years since the Lamberts went up against the Further. Now they must face their demons once and for all. The film stars Patrick Wilson, Rose Byrne, and Ty Simpkins. Insidious: The Red Door is out now, so head over to your local theater today and then listen to the reaction episode the following Monday, only on Cinematic Reviews. All right, let's talk about some standout scenes. The first one I have on my list is the first truck heist. This is essentially where the film opens up. The film does a really great job at not really spoiling who is involved with this heist. The characters are all wearing helmets. They're driving black cars, tinted windows. All we really see is the underneath the car is the glow. That becomes a pretty key component in trying to figure out who is driving these cars. But it's a cool sequence. What they do is they kind of corner the semi from three different spots. The lead car at the front has a passenger who shoots this really cool, I don't know what you would call it, like this crossbow looking thing that shoots this cable out. The first one smashes the window out, and then the second one comes in and shoots the line into the seat so that they can kind of zip line their way onto the truck. It's really, really cool action sequence. We get one shot where the driver of one of the cars has to go underneath the semi to avoid some construction work, and they kind of have to time and distance their vehicle in order to not collide with the semi while also underneath it. It's a really, really cool sequence. It's one of my favorite in the film for sure. It was going to be my favorite stunt of the film until later on in the film we get one from Letty that I think is a little bit cooler, but it's the same idea. So the film sets up that there could possibly be three different groups of people that could be behind this heist. We have the Vin Diesel's, Dom's, Toretto's gang could be the suspects or the culprits of it. That is where Paul Walker comes in. He takes it upon himself to infiltrate the gang in order to find out if they are behind it. They also hint that it could be this Johnny Tran and his crew that could be involved with this heist, or it could be a third party that no one even considered, but in reality, as we know, it is Dom's crew that is behind these heists of DVD players, which is funny to watch now in 2023 because, like I said, DVDs aren't really as huge as they were. Now with the whole streaming and digital age that we are living in, DVDs have kind of been left behind in the past. People like me who are still loyal to having hard copies of films because I love film so much. I like to have a visual look, especially in in the studio where I record. I've got my steelbook collection all over the room, so I'm still a huge supporter and hard copies of films. But it's really funny, say like my sister who's 11, watching this film would kind of raise some questions with her. They're really stealing DVD players. Why aren't they just stealing money or jewels or the classic heist one? No, they're stealing DVD players to make profit, which is really, really funny to talk about in 2023. But back in 2001, I mean, it made sense. DVDs were huge. They were just starting out. They were $20 a pop. Everyone wanted a DVD player. Everyone needed one, so they could turn that over for pretty decent profit back in 2001. So that's the first sequence. Really, really awesome action stuff in there. Then the next one I have is Brian racing Dom for his respect, which is one of my favorite scenes of the film. Brian comes in with his Eclipse, that really cool lime green color car. And then Dom, of course, driving his red. I didn't get a chance to look up his car, but Dom and his crew kind of have like the same decals on their car. They're a little different. This is the only time I really see this. After this film, everyone kind of drives a more modern looking vehicle. They aren't necessarily driving like street race cars like these, which really show you that this film is a film of its time. Uh, as the franchise goes on, they start to get a little more modern with the vehicles and not so much like decals on them like we see in here. I think the decals are cool. I kind of wish they would have kept these vehicles in the future installments, but I get it. They're trying to, modernize these films, trying to stick with the times so people can relate more. But I really do kind of miss all the decals that they put on their cars during their street racing. But this race in particular is really, really cool. I mean, we get one of the most iconic lines from Vin Diesel at the end where, so Brian, almost beats Dom, but Dominic is able to get the upper hand with that hit of that sweet, sweet nos at the end of the race. Brian kind of blurts out, dude, I almost had you. And Vin Diesel's, chuckling and laughing. He's like, no, you never had me. You didn't even have your car. It doesn't matter if you win by an inch, by a mile. Winning is winning. Just really, really awesome interactions between Brian and Dom here, kind of really showing where their relationship started, and then eventually they become brothers, later on in the franchise. So it's really cool to kind of revisit where their relationship was built on, and it was essentially this race, and then from here on out, Brian's always trying to, race Dom to try to beat him and trying to earn his respect. And this is where it all begins, and it's really, really cool to revisit here. Then we have Johnny Tran blowing up Brian's car. This is a pretty quick scene, but it does a great job at setting up that Johnny Tran is going to be the antagonist of this film, even though Dom is technically, a bad guy. They're stealing DVDs, they're committing crime. But this film is really good at, still trying to build a connection with the audience and Dominic by throwing in this Johnny Tran antagonist to kind of erase our minds from the fact that technically Toretto is the bad guy in this film. But Johnny Tran is an even more bad guy because, well, he kills Jesse. He blows up Brian's car. He's causing mayhem in LA for Dominic. But really, really cool scene here where, they're having this showdown. They drive off, they come back, they spray Brian's car with the Uzis, and then because of the NOS, it blows up. I mean, we get that line from Vin Diesel screaming, NOS! And then it just blows up. Really cool explosion. Unfortunately, that is, and I'll talk about this a little more, but that's probably my favorite car in the film, and it gets blown up after the first few minutes. Then we have Brian Spillner is revealed to actually be Officer Brian O'Connor of the LAPD. This is where the Point Break tie-in comes in because it's the same exact thing. Keanu was a police officer who was undercover infiltrating Patrick Swayze's gang in that film. And this is basically the same thing, except for that Point Break was big on, surfing and robbing banks. Fast and Furious is racing cars and stealing DVD players. But this was a cool twist, I actually saw this before Point Break. So when I was a kid, and then I eventually watched Point Break, I was like, oh, that's just like Fast and Furious. But in reality, it's the reverse. Fast and Furious is just like Point Break. But as a kid, I saw this before I saw Point Break. So this is the only time I ever saw, like a cop going undercover as in a gang, trying to get the bad guy. This is my first introduction to, the whole world of undercover cops. But yeah, this is a really cool reveal. Paul Walker seems to be a really, really young officer. He's not a detective. I'm guessing he's probably just a few months out of the academy, or maybe he's been a beat cop for a couple years. But now he is probably trying to work his way up to becoming detective by becoming involved with the undercover unit. I'm not the most knowledgeable in cop careers and whatnot, but that's what I would kind of assume that he's doing is he's going through the ranks, as we saw, and saw in Training Day with Ethan Hawke. He was a beat cop for a few years, then he went into narcotics with Denzel in order to become detective and captain. And I think this would be kind of the same assumption here, that Brian wants to eventually become a detective, so he is doing his time in undercover work to move up into the ranks. Then we have one of the most iconic scenes here is the family meal, which becomes a staple of all these installments later on. This is where we really get to see Paul Walker becoming one of the family. They're breaking bread with the Torettos. This is where we get Vince coming back like a little puppy dog, after him and Brian haven't really been on the same foot together. I mean, we get that I should have wrote this in here, but we get that fight outside of Toretto's grocery store, which, like I said, was all improvised. And then once Vince comes back, things are still, still tension there. But you can really tell that Toretto kind of prefers Brian a little bit more than Vince. He kind of sees Vince as a hothead, but he's still part of the family. So, and then we have the cops and Brian taking down Johnny Tran and his crew. I always remember this scene partially because of the music, but also I love it that when Johnny Tran is handcuffed, his dad comes over and just backhands him like the child that he is. And for some reason, that scene just sticks into my mind every time I hear the Fast and Furious. The music starts playing. I got to look up the song, but it was a huge song in the early 2000s. I mean, I listened to it all the time. But yeah, it's just something about that scene where Johnny Tran's dad just backhanding him in front of everybody was just, I don't know, it just burned into my brain. So I put that on the list. Then we switch over to Race Wars, which is kind of the brainchild of Dom and Letty. It's this huge event where racers come in out to the desert and race each other's for money, pink slips, whatever. We get two big races here. We have Letty versus I wrote down Smartass because they never really say his name. He's kind of hitting on Letty. He's like, oh, I'm going to win your car. I'm going to win you. Stuff like that. And Letty's kind of just brushing it off like, I'm going to smoke this dude, which she does. I think she is one of the most badass characters in this franchise, and this scene really proves it. She just smokes this guy like he's nothing, She's more of a skilled driver. Her car is faster. It's just was really, really awesome to see Letty have some girl power into this film and just win a race straight up, and it was really cool. Then we get this other one with Jesse versus Johnny Tran, which is just idiotic. I don't exactly know what Jesse was thinking here. He explains to Brian that he's gonna win this race so that he can get the car for his dad when he's out of jail, and they can go drive off to the sunset. It's all flawed, but you gotta give it to Jesse for having some heart, some cojones, and wanting to become part of the team. He wants to win a race. Turns out Johnny Tran is the person that he's racing. His car is far superior to Jesse's. Fun fact, Jesse's white car in here was actually purchased by Frankie Muniz, who is now a huge race car driver post his acting career. So that was a really cool fact that I found out while researching for today's episode. So to no surprise, Johnny Tran wins this race, forcing Jesse to hand over his car, but Jesse decides to drive off. And Dom has this great line where he's like, oh, he's going to go get a car wash. He'll be right back. And they kind of shout at each other. And we get this big moment where Johnny Tran accuses Dominic of snitching on him to the cops. And then we get this another iconic line from Vin Diesel where he's yelling, I ain't narked on nobody. And everyone's holding him back. They're trying to kill each other. It's just a crazy sequence of events, but that line of I ain't narked on nobody by Vin Diesel is always stuck in my head. Next scene I have is the final truck heist. This is where we get Letty almost dying as the trucker runs her off the road. We also get Vince, kind of tied up by the cables, and we get a couple shots of his bloody arm. Like I said in the fact segment, it was going to be a lot more graphic, but they toned it down to get that PG-13 rating. His arm should be pretty much cut off at this point. I mean, he's hanging there for a good, 10, 15 minutes, and his arm should be completely off by now. But it's a movie, so I kind of brushed that off. But another crazy sequence here with all the cars driving around. We have the truckers finally arming themselves with shotguns, so he's shooting Vince with the shotgun. It's all chaos. Eventually, Brian and Mia show up, and Brian is able to get Vince free of the cable, and they are able to pull over. Then we get the big moment here where Brian is forced to call in one of those life support helicopters because Vince is essentially dying here out in the boonies. So he must, reveal to everyone that he is a cop in order to save Vince's life. And we get that moment where Dominic is just shocked that Brian is a cop and Vince was right the entire time. And so they are forced to part ways. And then afterwards, this leads into the death of Jesse. So Brian shows up at the Toretto house trying to explain to Dominic about why he did everything. So eventually Johnny Tran shows up with his cousin, who I don't remember his name. He's another actor that I've seen in quite a few stuff throughout the years. But so they come in hot with Uzis and just start mowing everything down. They're shooting into the house. They're shooting at Toretto. Just shooting everywhere. Jesse, unfortunately, gets hit and he dies. So I got to backtrack here. So Brian doesn't show up until after Jesse. Brian isn't present during the death of Jesse. I kind of fused these two scenes together. But actually, Brian doesn't show up until after because we get that shot of Dom with the shotgun threatening to go kill Johnny Tran for what he did to Jesse. Eventually, or am I getting those? Either way, these two scenes kind of happen back to back. So this leads into the chase between Brian and Dom and Johnny Tran and his cousin. Johnny Tran and his cousin are on these motocross bikes. They're zipping through LA. I love all the car stunts in this film. Brian is chasing after Johnny Tran. Dom is going after Tran's cousin. He eventually wipes out the cousin. He goes tumbling down a hill. I think he's alive or dead. They kind of leave that open ended. But we do see Johnny Tran die. We get that cool shot of Brian kind of doing like a drift stop in the middle of the street, and he's still in the car while he's shooting his gun, and he ends up getting Johnny Tran a couple of times in the back with his gun, sending him flying off the bike and dying out on the streets. So really cool chase sequence and action sequence and a lot of gunfire. Just a really awesome, 10, 15 minutes of just chaos. And then the last scene I have written down is Brian giving Dom the keys to the Supra, which is the 10-second car that Brian owes Dom since Brian's car got blown up by Johnny Tran at the beginning of the film. Another very, very iconic moment. Before this, they're kind of racing each other down this street. They go up against a train. They're able to pass the train, but then a semi comes out of nowhere, and we get this crazy stunt where it hits Dominic's car on the passenger side, and it just flips him over Brian's car, and then kind of does a few tumbles in the street. You could tell Dom's arm is pretty messed up, but he kind of walks away pretty cleanly regardless. And then this is where Brian hands over the keys because he's like, I owe you a 10-second car, kind of like I pay my debts. I got respect for you. Get out of here before the cops come. For some reason, I really like how Paul Walker held the keys. It was kind of weird. He like held the one key in between the two fingers. It's hard to explain it on a voice podcast, but if you go back and watch that scene, Paul Walker is holding the key in a really really interesting way where he's kind of like holding the whole thing with two fingers. I don't know, for some reason that sticks out in my mind. I really really like how he just held the key there out to Dom. Well, that's the Fast and Furious. Awesome first film. A lot of great car chases, racing scenes, a lot of character moments in here. It's really not until like Fast 5 and 6 and 7 where we get into these really really big crazy stunts that I'll break down. But it's nice to kind of start out small with this film and just kind of focus on the characters, because I love the characters. I love the interactions between Brian and Dom and Brian and Mia, and the tension between Vince and Brian, and the aftermath of Jesse. Jesse. I didn't put it in the scenes either, but we get this really cool sense that he's a really, really smart guy. He knows his vehicles. He's we get that one scene where him and Brian are using this computer program to put together the Supra that Brian brought in, and kind of like visualize what it's going to be like when they're done finishing it. And Brian makes that comment like, "Man, you should have been an MIT or something. You're a genius at this." And Jesse kind of explains, I had ADD. I couldn't. I'm really good at cars and math, but like science and history, I just was crap at. So he ended up flunking out of high school. It's really, really. It's scenes like that where we get these really deep character moments that I kind of miss in these newer installments, because they're just overshadowed by these big ridiculous stunts that they do, like going to space or throwing cars around with magnets, stuff like that. So it's really really nice to revisit this first film where it's all about the characters and the racing and just smaller stunts. I've got a few quotes written down that I really stand out to me every time I watch this film. This isn't a huge quote movie. There are a couple very very iconic quotes in here, but that's about it. When we get to like Fast 5 and 6, there's a lot of great quotes from like Tyrese and Ludacris and all that. And so this segment will be a lot bigger. It's really small in this first couple of films. But the first one I have is from Edwin. He's one of the racers in that race that we see between Brian and Dominic. Ja Rule plays him. He screams Monica as Paul Walker passes by him during the race. That always sticks out to me. Then this one that I opened up with the episode from Dom: doesn't matter if you win by an inch or a mile, winning is winning. And then another one from these, I got quite a few here from Dom. I said a 10-second car, not a 10-minute car. Scares the shit out of me, as he's talking about the car that him and his dad built before his dad unfortunately passed away. I never knocked on nobody. And then this one so it starts off with Brian: dude, I almost had you. And then Dominic responds: you never had me, you never had your car. Great line there. Couple more from Brian: I get the cash and I get your respect. To some, that's more important. I owe you a 10-second car. And then I like the tuna. And then Vince is like, nobody likes the tuna. And then, of course, Vince always calling Brian Buster, which I like. When we get to Fast 5, that's a big moment there for me. When Vince is like Buster. Just for some reason, I just really, really love that Vince gave Brian the Buster nickname. So a couple other segments here. So new to this franchise, we have favorite car and favorite stunt. So favorite car, it's Brian's 1995 Mitsubishi Eclipse. This is the bright lime green car that he drives at the beginning of the film that eventually gets blown up by Johnny Tran. I thought about putting his Supra in there. That was the orange car that they rebuild at Toretto's shop. But for some reason, I just really, really like the look of the Eclipse that Brian drives in here. It's really, really cool. Favorite stunt. So originally I was going to put the first sequence from the opening shot of the heist where the black car is driving underneath the semi. But then we get this scene at the very, very end during the final fight, the heist scene where Letty kind of does the same thing, but instead of driving under, just staying underneath it, she passes completely through underneath the semi into the next lane, which I think is pretty freaking awesome. I mean, you got to get your timing right, you got to get your speed right, you got to get your distance right. It's just insane. It's really, really awesome that she did that. One of my favorite stunts in the franchise for sure. It's really, really cool. It's really, really simple too, but it just blows my mind every time I see it. For negatives, I only have one real negative. Overall, I think this is a pretty solid film after all these years. And that negative is it's just a movie of its time. Some of the dialogue is very early 2000s. The stunts are really, really simple. Like there's hardly any big stunts. We don't get like a safe being driven through Rio, or we don't get them battling tanks. Just very, very simple stunts, and I kind of wish that they would have, been a little bigger. But of course, this is 2001. They probably didn't really have the technology, or it's very, very early stages of that technology, or they just didn't have the idea at the time. But and then the cinematography, it's beautifully shot for sure. But you can really tell that this is a 2001 movie because you can just tell. But that's really really, really picking at it. Mostly, I think this is an incredible film. Definitely one of my favorites of the franchise. It's really, really well made for as simple as it is. And then burning questions. There's two huge burning questions that I have. Is how young is Mia exactly? They don't really go in and specify. She mentioned that she was doing homework or studying for school. I believe Dom is 24 in the film. So I got to imagine Mia is what? 18 maybe? It's the reason why I brought this up is because, well, Paul Walker and Jordana Brewster, it's implied that they had sex during this movie. So if she's underage, that's a whole nother discussion. But if she is, 18, 19, 20, then we don't need to have that discussion. But if she is, 16, 17, then that's a pretty dark side of this movie. But I think they purposely don't explain what her actual age is. I should just look it up because I am curious. I think I think when that scene where she's on the bed studying, I think she's going to college. But I mean, not to sound like a douche, but the Torettos don't really seem like the kind of family that would be going to college, but I can't imagine why they would put her that young in this movie. So I'm gonna look this up. Actually, I should have did this before the film, before I did this episode. I think she's got to be. So she's either a high school. She's got to be a high school senior, or maybe a freshman in college. Yeah, I would say she's in the 18 to 20 range, but that's always had me curious on how young she actually is. Because I mean, Jordana Brewster is pretty young in this film, and so is Michelle Rodriguez. I mean, they're all really, really young in here. Like I said, I think Dominic's 24 in this first film. So yeah, I think Mia's got to be 18 to 20 range. So that's just one of the questions. It's a huge question that a lot of fans ask with this first film because they don't really specifically come out and say it, and she's studying in bed as if she was in high school, and then she has this relationship with this cop, so it's kind of weird. But I'm gonna say she's, a senior in high school, freshman in college, 18 to 20 range. But the big one I have is, what the hell happened to Leon? I talked about this at the top of the episode. It's the general theory is that, the final heist got too wild for him. Seeing Vince almost die, seeing Letty almost die, he's just out. I think the studio just is like, we don't need Leon. Because there was a huge break because we had Too Fast and Furious, then we had Tokyo Drift, and then we had the fourth film, Fast and Furious, which kind of rebooted this franchise. Too Fast, Too Furious, and Tokyo Drift kind of left the franchise in limbo for a few years. And then Vin Diesel came back and kind of rebooted it with that fourth film. And I just don't think there was room for Leon. And then he kind of just got left behind after that. But I really do hope that he comes back. This finale part of the story is supposedly going to be 2 more films. Fast X was part 1. And then Vin Diesel has stated that there are going to be 2 parts left in this, this finale trilogy. So hopefully Leon makes a comeback in one of those 2 installments, but I wouldn't hold my breath. But I think if there was enough fan outcry, I think Vin Diesel would have the power to make it happen, because Johnny Strong, he has stated that he really loves the character and he would really love to come back. But the story has to be right, and it's got to mean something, which I totally understand. I don't want them to just throw him in there, I want his comeback to be meaningful and to be special. So those are my burning questions. As we go through the season, this will probably grow more along with the negatives. But yeah, let's move on to the Fast and Furious rankings. So here is where the Fast and Furious rankings are at the moment. At number 1, we have Fast 5, 2 Furious 7, 3 Fast and Furious 6, 4 The Fast and the Furious, 5 Fast and Furious, 6 Too Fast, Too Furious, 7 The Fate of the Furious, 8 The Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift, 9 Hobbs and Shaw, 10 Fast X, and then at 11 Fast 9 The Fast Saga. So the Fast and Furious is sitting at 4. One of my favorite films of the franchise, one of the best of the franchise. Fast 5 is one of the greatest action films of all time. I'm super excited when we get to that one and I break that film down. Definitely my favorite of the series. I think it's the best of the franchise. Followed by Furious 7, which is very, very emotional with the passing of Paul Walker and how they kind of handled the Brian character in the series. For the longest time, Fast and Furious 6 was my favorite of the franchise. But when Fast 10 was coming out, I did a rewatch of most of these films, and Fast 5 and Furious 7 are definitely my favorites. But there's a lot of great stuff in Fast and Furious 6. I love Paul Walker in there. I love Letty in there. Just a great action movie. Looking forward to that one as well. No surprise at the bottom. It's Fast 10 and F9. If you listen to my reaction episode on Fast 10, I was pretty low on it. Jason Momoa character was just way too ridiculous and really unnecessary on how crazy he was in there. Fast 9 is just not a good movie. I do not care for the John Cena character. There's a really cool magnet sequence in there, but the fact that they go to space is just really, really eye-rolling. It's just way too ridiculous in the wrong ways. Same with Hobbs and Shaw. Dwayne Johnson and Statham were good together in Fate of the Furious, but then they're like, let's make a whole movie out of it, and it just really didn't work. Vanessa Kirby's really cool in there. Idris Elba, who is a great actor and I love, it's just he was really overacting in there, and he was really going for it. Just the film overall just didn't work. So those are, the bottom of the barrel, and they're of course all post Furious 7, which really emphasizes my statement on the franchise really, really died when Paul Walker died. So, but that is where the franchise is sitting now as far as rankings. I'm really curious if this does switch up at all throughout the season. It's happened a couple times. Mission Impossible was probably the biggest one where for the longest time I was a Rogue Nation fan. But after that season and talking to through the podcast and all that, Fallout ended up becoming my favorite installment of that franchise. So I'm really curious to see if that's going to be the case here. If Fast 6 goes back up to number 1, or if Fast and Furious, which is the 4th installment, if that moves up at all, or maybe even Too Fast, Too Furious, which has been one of the lowest ranked installments of the franchise, but I really like it because I think Paul Walker's great in there. I like his relationship with Ludacris and Tyrese in there. Eva Mendes is in there, who is incredible. So I'm curious to see if that moves up at all as well, or when we get to F9, does that go past Fast 10, or does Hobbs and Shaw move up? I'm really curious to see how I feel throughout the season, because like Hobbs and Shaw, I haven't really seen since it came out. Same with Tokyo Drift. Tokyo Drift has been a few years. That's definitely the one I've seen the least amount of times. Same with F9. I haven't seen that since it came out. So yeah, I'm just really, really looking forward to this season. One of my favorite franchises, like I said, of all time, right up there with Indiana Jones and Star Wars and Marvel. But Fast and Furious, I've been just in love with the franchise ever since I first saw those first couple of movies on DVD back in the day. Well, that'll do it for this first episode of the Fast and Furious season here on Cinematic Reviews. Tune in next week for Too Fast, Too Furious, which is the Paul Walker-led sequel to The Fast and the Furious. It also is the introduction to Tyrese Gibson's Roman and Ludacris's Tej character. So I'm really looking forward for that. Also, check out new release reactions every week on the show. Next, I'll be reacting to Insidious, The Red Door. This is the final film in the main storyline of the Insidious franchise. Until then, always remember to live life a quarter mile at a time.